Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Galveston, Texas. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented stories reach. In the summer of 1856, while most of Galveston Island was celebrating its growing prosperity, something happened at the coal plantation that would never make it into official records. The property, located 3 miles east of the bustling port, was known for its profitable cotton fields and the peculiar silence that seemed to envelop the main house. A silence that, according to old letters discovered nearly a century later, spoke more loudly than any scream ever could. Nathan Cole had established himself as one of the wealthiest plantation owners in Galveston County. His wife, Rosalie Duval, was known for her French ancestry and the quiet dignity with which she managed the household affairs. The coal plantation stood as a testament to the economic boom that Texas had experienced since joining the Union 11 years prior. From the harbor, you could just make out the white columns of the main house standing like sentinels against the flat coastal landscape. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not what was found, but what disappeared without explanation. According to customs records from the port of Galveston, the coal plantation reported 43 enslaved individuals in January of 1856. By December of that same year, that number had mysteriously dropped to 29. 14 souls vanished from official documentation. No deaths reported, no sales recorded, simply gone. The county archives contain no explanation for this discrepancy. When examined by historian Margaret Woodward in 1963, she noted that several pages from the coal plantation ledger appeared to have been removed. The cut was clean, professional, as if someone had carefully excised a specific period from history. The mystery might have remained buried, if not for what was discovered in 1964 during renovations to what remained of the old coal property. Construction workers uncovered a sealed compartment beneath the dining room floor. Inside was a tin box containing a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but still legible. The handwriting belonged to Elizabeth Cole, Nathan and Rosalie's 18-year-old daughter. What Elizabeth documented over the course of 6 months in 1856 tells a story that contradicts everything that Galveston society believed about the respected Cole family. A story of obsession, manipulation, and a darkness that festered behind closed doors. The journal was briefly examined by local authorities before being transferred to the University of Texas archives for preservation. 3 weeks later, a fire in the storage facility destroyed several historical documents. According to the report filed, Elizabeth Cole's journal was among the items lost. However, before its destruction, portions were transcribed by Dr. James Hargrove, whose personal notes would later surface in an estate sale in 1968. What follows is an account pieced together from those surviving transcriptions, port records, church registries, and the personal correspondence of those connected to the coal plantation. This is not a ghost story. There are no supernatural elements to what happened on that property in 1856. The horror that unfolded was entirely human in nature, and perhaps that's what makes it truly disturbing. The weather in Galveston during the summer of 1856 was unusually hot and dry. The cotton fields were suffering, and tension hung in the air like the relentless humidity. Elizabeth's journal begins in April, with observations about changes in her father's behavior. Nathan Cole had always been stern but fair in his business dealings. However, something shifted that spring. According to Elizabeth's writings, her father began spending long hours in his study, often refusing meals and speaking in hushed tones with Rosalie behind closed doors. "Father paces the floorboards above my room until dawn," she wrote on April 12th. When I inquired about his troubles at breakfast, Mother silenced me with a glance. There is a heaviness in this house that seems to be crushing us all. The first indication that something was truly amiss came in early May. Elizabeth documented a strange encounter with one of the house servants, a woman named Sarah. According to the journal, Sarah had been employed in the Cole household for over a decade, serving primarily as Rosalie's personal attendant. Elizabeth wrote that she found Sarah trembling in the kitchen pantry one morning, clutching a small cloth bundle to her chest. "I asked what troubled her, but she would not speak," Elizabeth recorded. "When I reached for her hand, she pulled away as if burned. 'Miss Elizabeth,' she finally whispered, 'some things are better left unseen.'" Before I could question her further, Mother appeared in the doorway. Sarah straightened immediately, her face emptying of all emotion. The bundle had vanished into the folds of her dress. 2 days later, Sarah was gone. When Elizabeth asked about her absence, Rosalie explained that Sarah had been transferred to work in the fields. This struck Elizabeth as odd, given Sarah's position and years of service in the main house. When Elizabeth attempted to locate Sarah among the field workers, she was told that no one by that name worked on the plantation. Sarah had simply disappeared. She wasn't the last to vanish that summer. Church records from St. Mary's Cathedral in Galveston show that Rosalie Cole increased her attendance dramatically between May and September of 1856. The parish priest, Father Thomas Moore, noted in his personal diary that Mrs. Cole seemed troubled by matters of the soul and requested private confession weekly. What was discussed in those confessions remains between Rosalie and her priest, but Father Moore's writings suggest a growing concern. Mrs. Cole speaks of salvation and sacrifice in concerning terms, he wrote in late June. When pressed, she refers only to a necessary cleansing. I fear her understanding of doctrine has become dangerously distorted. Elizabeth's journal entries from this period describe changes in the household routine. Meals became silent affairs, with Nathan often absent. Rosalie developed new rules. No one was permitted to enter the east wing of the house, where Nathan's study was located. The household staff was reduced, with familiar faces disappearing without explanation. Most concerning to Elizabeth was her mother's new habit of locking all interior doors at sunset. "I was awakened last night by voices in the courtyard," reads an entry from June 30th. "When I tried to investigate, I found my bedroom door locked from the outside. The voices continued until dawn, low murmurs punctuated by what sounded like weeping. When morning came, I confronted Mother about being confined to my room. She claimed it was for my protection, though from what danger, she would not say." By July, Elizabeth began documenting strange sounds coming from beneath the house at night. The Cole mansion, like many substantial homes in Galveston, was built elevated on pillars to protect against flooding. The space beneath was typically used for storage and remained cool even in summer heat. Elizabeth described rhythmic scraping and the sound of metal on stone emanating from below her bedroom floor. "I cannot sleep," she wrote on July 15th. "The sounds continue for hours, and with them comes a smell that seeps through the floorboards, earthy and metallic. This morning I noticed soil in the hallway outside Father's study. When I mentioned it to Mother, she claimed it must have been tracked in by the gardener, though I have not seen Mr. Winters on the property for nearly a month." The journal indicates that Elizabeth attempted to investigate the space beneath the house on at least 2 occasions. The first time, she found the access points sealed with new padlocks. The second attempt, in early August, proved more fruitful and more disturbing. "I finally managed to pry loose the boards beneath the kitchen pantry," she recorded. "The space below was too dark to see clearly, but I lowered a lantern on a string. What it illuminated makes no sense. The earth has been disturbed, with neat rectangular depressions arranged in rows. They resemble nothing so much as open graves, though smaller than would accommodate a full-grown person." Before I could investigate further, I heard Mother's footsteps. I barely had time to pull up the lantern and replace the boards. The next day, Elizabeth noted that the kitchen pantry floor had been nailed shut and a heavy cabinet moved to cover the area. Court records show that in August of 1856, Nathan Cole made an unusual purchase: 20 barrels of quicklime, typically used in construction or agricultural applications. Elizabeth's journal mentions the delivery, noting that the barrels were taken directly to the space beneath the house. "Father supervised the placement himself," she wrote. "When I asked about the purpose of the lime, he looked through me as if I were not there." Mother later explained it was for treating the soil in preparation for a garden renovation, but we have never maintained gardens on the north side of the property. By September, Elizabeth's entries became increasingly desperate. She documented attempts to communicate with plantation workers, only to find herself more isolated. Her parents restricted her movement, claiming concerns for her health. A physician, Dr. William Harris, was summoned to examine Elizabeth on September 10th. His medical notes, preserved in the county records, indicate that he found the young woman agitated but physically sound, and prescribed rest and limited excitement. "Dr. Harris is complicit," Elizabeth wrote afterward. "He spoke with Father privately before examining me, and his questions seemed designed to establish a pattern of nervous excitement. He suggested I might be suffering from feminine hysteria and recommended I be kept indoors. They are conspiring to silence me." The most disturbing entry comes from September 20th. Elizabeth described waking in the night to find her mother standing at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep. She was perfectly still, her white nightdress glowing in the moonlight. When she realized I was awake, she did not start or apologize for the intrusion. Instead, she sat beside me and stroked my hair with cold fingers. "You have always been such a curious child," she whispered. "But there are matters in this world that require discretion and sacrifice. Your father and I have taken on a great burden to secure our position. Soon, it will be your turn to contribute to the family legacy." She kissed my forehead and left, locking the door behind her. The final dated entry in Elizabeth's journal is from October 3rd, 1856. It contains just 3 lines. "They are planning something for the new moon. I have found a loose board in the window frame. If I do not have another opportunity to write, know that what happens beneath this house is not the will of God, regardless of what Mother believes." There are no further entries. According to Galveston Society records, Elizabeth Cole was sent to stay with relatives in New Orleans in mid-October, supposedly to complete her education at a prestigious finishing school. Correspondence between Rosalie and her sister-in-law in New Orleans, however, contains no mention of such arrangements. What happened to Elizabeth Cole remains unknown. No records of her arrival in New Orleans exist. No marriage certificate, death certificate, or further documentation of her life can be found in any archive. Like the 14 people missing from the plantation records, she simply vanished. The winter of 1856 brought change to the Cole plantation. According to business records, Nathan Cole sold a significant portion of his land holdings in December, despite falling cotton prices. Neighbors reported that the Coles became increasingly reclusive. The number of social engagements they hosted or attended dropped to almost none. Rosalie's church attendance became sporadic before stopping altogether by February 1857. A letter from Mrs. Margaret Thornton to her daughter in Virginia, dated January 1857, provides a rare glimpse into public perception of the Coles during this period. The Christmas gala at the Hopkins estate was well attended, though noticeably absent were the Coles. Nathan's absence might be explained by business matters, but Rosalie has withdrawn from society entirely. When encountered at the market last week, she appeared gaunt and distracted. Her once immaculate appearance has given way to something approaching neglect. There are whispers among the servants about strange occurrences at the coal plantation, workers refusing assignments there, and items being delivered at unusual hours. Nathan's business associates report that he has become erratic in his dealings, alternating between excessive generosity and surprising cruelty. The most concrete evidence of deteriorating conditions comes from a complaint filed with the county sheriff in March 1857. A merchant named Thomas Wilson reported that Nathan Cole had threatened him with a firearm during a dispute over an unpaid debt. The sheriff's notes indicate that when he visited the coal plantation to investigate, he found the main house in a state of disrepair, with broken windows boarded over and the once manicured grounds overgrown. Nathan was described as unkempt and agitated, insisting that his business affairs were private matters. No charges were filed. Rosalie Cole's mental decline is documented in a series of letters between her sister, Catherine Duval, and their family physician in New Orleans. Catherine visited the plantation in April 1857 and was apparently so disturbed by what she found that she consulted the doctor immediately upon her return. "My sister is not herself," she wrote. "She speaks in riddles about purification and necessary sacrifices. The house, once a showpiece of Galveston society, has fallen into shameful condition. Most concerning are the inexplicable scratches on the interior walls, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. When I inquired about Elizabeth, Rosalie became hysterical, claiming that her daughter was closer than I knew. Nathan appears to have surrendered all authority in the household to my sister's increasingly bizarre dictates. There were rooms I was forbidden to enter and subjects I was not permitted to mention. I fear for both their sanities." The physician recommended that Rosalie be brought to New Orleans for treatment, but there is no evidence that this occurred. Instead, the Coles withdrew further from public view. The final chapter of the Cole family saga came in September 1857, almost exactly 1 year after Elizabeth's last journal entry. A severe hurricane struck Galveston Island, causing widespread destruction. The coal plantation, with its deteriorating structures, was particularly vulnerable. The main house was severely damaged, forcing Nathan and Rosalie to relocate to their property in Houston. During the cleanup efforts, according to an account published in the Galveston Daily News, workers made a gruesome discovery. The article, dated October 5, 1857, reports only that human remains were found on the coal property and that authorities were investigating. No follow-up stories appeared in subsequent editions. County records show that Sheriff James Williams conducted an inquiry but filed no charges. His official report states only that remains discovered on the coal property appear to date from the previous year, and that, due to hurricane damage and decomposition, determination of identity and cause is not possible. The matter was officially closed on October 20th, 1857. Nathan and Rosalie Cole never returned to Galveston. They lived in relative obscurity in Houston until Nathan's death from liver failure in 1862. Rosalie survived him by only 3 months, reportedly taking her own life in January 1863. The Houston Telegraph's brief obituary mentioned only that she was preceded in death by her husband and daughter, the sole public acknowledgement that Elizabeth Cole had not simply gone away to school. The coal plantation in Galveston changed hands multiple times over the following decades. Each owner reported difficulties with the property, structural problems, soil that would not sustain crops, and an inability to retain workers. By the turn of the century, the land had been divided and sold for development as Galveston expanded eastward. The main house, or what remained of it, was demolished in 1922. The story might have ended there, forgotten like so many dark chapters of history, if not for the renovation work in 1964 that uncovered Elizabeth's journal. The brief window during which scholars had access to her writings opened a door to questions that have never been fully answered. What happened to the 14 people missing from the plantation records? What became of Elizabeth Cole? What was the purpose of the excavations beneath the house, and why did the Coles purchase so much quicklime? In 1968, a geological survey was conducted in the area where the Cole plantation once stood, preparatory to the construction of an office complex. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies in the soil composition. According to the surveyor's report, there were regular disturbances in the subsoil layer, approximately 6 to 8 feet below current grade, extending in a grid pattern over roughly half an acre. The report recommended archaeological assessment before construction proceeded. That assessment never took place. The construction company changed its plans, citing engineering challenges, and built on a different section of the property. The area in question was paved over for a parking facility that stands to this day. In 1969, Dr. James Hargrove published a brief paper in the Journal of Texas History discussing Elizabeth Cole's journal and its implications. He stopped short of making direct accusations, but suggested that the evidence pointed to systematic elimination of individuals from the plantation and a subsequent cover-up. The paper received little attention outside academic circles and was largely forgotten after Hargrove's death in a car accident the following year. His personal notes, which contain more detailed transcriptions of the journal than appeared in his published work, were sold along with his other effects. They passed through several private collections before being donated to the Galveston Historical Society in 1987. There they remained, catalogued but largely unexamined, until historian Rebecca Martinez began researching disappearances associated with Galveston plantations in 2008. Martinez found a pattern that extended beyond the Cole plantation. Between 1855 and 1858, several prominent Galveston families reported unusual reductions in their enslaved populations. These changes coincided with a period of economic uncertainty following a minor banking crisis in 1855. Martinez hypothesized that these families, facing financial pressure but unwilling to sell human property at depressed prices, may have resorted to drastic measures to reduce costs while maintaining appearances of prosperity. The Cole plantation, with its well-documented discrepancies, became the centerpiece of Martinez's research. However, her work was cut short when funding for her project was unexpectedly withdrawn in 2009. The preliminary findings were never published, and Martinez declined to discuss the matter further, accepting a position at a university in California. Today, the site where the Cole plantation once stood is occupied by commercial developments and residential neighborhoods. Nothing remains of the main house or the outbuildings. The only physical reminder is a small historical marker on Broadway Avenue that makes no mention of Nathan, Rosalie, or Elizabeth Cole, only noting that the area was home to several productive plantations in the mid-19th century before becoming part of Galveston's urban expansion. The true nature of what happened at the Cole plantation in 1856 may never be known with certainty. The evidence that might have provided answers has been lost, destroyed, or deliberately suppressed. What remains are fragments. A journal briefly glimpsed before disappearing, discrepancies in official records, rumors passed down through generations. Some long-time residents of the area claim that the parking lot built over the site of the former plantation is haunted. They report unusual cold spots, even in the height of Galveston's humid summers, and an inexplicable sense of dread that overcomes anyone who lingers too long after dark. Such stories are easily dismissed as urban legends, the kind that accumulate around any location with a troubled history. More difficult to dismiss are the findings of a ground composition study conducted in 2015 when the parking facility was scheduled for resurfacing. Core samples revealed unusually high concentrations of calcium compounds in the soil beneath the asphalt, consistent with the presence of quicklime. The environmental assessment noted this as a minor anomaly, but found no health or safety concerns that would prevent the work from proceeding. The resurfacing was completed in January 2016. During the process, workers uncovered what appeared to be a small leather-bound book approximately 2 feet below the original surface. According to the construction foreman's report, the item was severely deteriorated and fell apart when touched. The fragments were disposed of as construction debris. The Cole family's secrets remain buried beneath layers of time, concrete, and collective forgetting. Elizabeth's final witness to whatever horror transpired on that plantation has been silenced. The 14 missing people are nameless entries in a ledger, their fates unrecorded and unmourned. Rosalie's twisted logic and Nathan's complicity have never been fully exposed or understood. What we are left with is the outline of a darkness, human in origin, terrible in implication. A reminder that the most disturbing horrors in our history are not supernatural, but arise from the capacity for cruelty and calculation that exists within ordinary people. The Cole plantation mystery stands as a testament to what can happen when power operates without accountability, when desperate people make choices they believe necessity demands. In Galveston today, few remember the Cole family or the shadow their plantation cast. Life continues above the ground, where Elizabeth once listened to the sounds of digging in the night. Traffic passes over the spot where 14 people may have been buried in quicklime. The ocean breeze carries away the echoes of voices silenced over 160 years ago. But in archives and forgotten records, in fragments of journals and letters, traces remain. And occasionally, someone pieces together enough of these traces to glimpse the outline of what might have happened during that hot, dry summer in 1856, when people began to disappear from the Cole plantation and no one thought to ask why, or those who did ask disappeared themselves. Perhaps that is the most disturbing aspect of this mystery. Not what we know, but what remains hidden. Not the horror we can name, but the horror we can only sense in the spaces between documented facts, the quiet horror of history's silence. In 1968, during the sorting of Dr. Hargrove's effects, a sealed envelope was discovered addressed to future historians of Galveston. Inside was a single page of notes that never made it into his academic paper. The page contained what appeared to be a direct transcription from Elizabeth Cole's journal, dated September 25, 1856. I have discovered the truth, though I wish with every fiber of my being that I had remained ignorant. Last night I followed Mother and Father from the house. They did not notice me in the darkness as they made their way to the cotton storage barn. Inside, I witnessed something so contrary to nature and humanity that my hand trembles even now as I record it. Father has converted the back room of the barn into what can only be described as a processing area. There were tables of surgical implements, draining troughs, and containers of chemicals. Mother moved about the space with practiced efficiency, arranging tools while Father consulted a ledger. They spoke of inventory reduction and necessary sacrifices to maintain appearances. Father mentioned that the banks were threatening to call in their loans, that our apparent prosperity was a facade covering mounting debts. I watched in horror as they brought in Thomas, who has worked our fields for over 15 years. He was unconscious, likely drugged. What happened next, I cannot fully describe. My mind protects me by blurring the details. I can only record that it involved the systematic dismantling of a human being. Mother collected certain parts in jars of solution, consulting a document with Chinese characters. Father processed the remainder with quicklime in a pit beneath the floorboards. They spoke throughout the procedure with the detached interest of butchers discussing a particularly challenging cut of meat. Mother mentioned contacts in New Orleans, willing to pay handsomely for specific materials, especially those from young, healthy subjects. She referred to some arrangement with the physician who conducts unorthodox research. I now understand the purpose of the excavations beneath our house, temporary storage before final disposal. The missing workers have not been sold or transferred. They have been harvested piece by piece, their remains dissolved with chemicals to leave no trace. Most horrifying was Mother's casual mention of my coming involvement. Elizabeth has steady hands, she told Father. Once she understands the financial necessity, she will make a valuable assistant. They plan to introduce me to their enterprise after my 19th birthday next month. I must escape before then. I have written to Father Thomas at St. Mary's, begging for sanctuary, without revealing the full horror of what I've witnessed. If this journal is found, let it serve as testimony to the atrocities committed by Nathan and Rosalie Cole in the name of financial salvation. This page, unlike Hargrove's other notes, was never donated to any institution. Its current whereabouts are unknown, and its authenticity cannot be verified. However, if genuine, it provides a disturbing explanation for the disappearances at the Cole plantation, one far more mundane and therefore more horrifying than any supernatural theory. Historical records confirm that Nathan Cole was indeed facing financial difficulties in 1856. The banking panic of 1855 had created a credit shortage that particularly affected landowners who had expanded aggressively in previous years. Cole had purchased additional acreage in 1854, financing the acquisition through loans that became increasingly burdensome as agricultural prices fell. What remains unclear is whether the contacts in New Orleans Elizabeth allegedly mentioned were real, and if so, what purpose the harvested materials might have served. Medical schools in that era frequently struggled to obtain cadavers for anatomical study, creating a black market for human remains. More sinister possibilities have been suggested by some researchers, including connections to underground anatomical exhibitions or even occult practices. A tantalizing clue appears in the correspondence of Dr. Antoine Laurent, a New Orleans physician known for his controversial research into human anatomy. In the letter to a colleague dated November 1856, Laurent mentions receiving specialized preparations from a Gulf Coast supplier preserved with remarkable skill for a non-medical practitioner. The letter goes on to describe these preparations as particularly valuable due to their freshness and the precision of their extraction. Laurent's research papers were largely destroyed during the Civil War, but fragments survive in the archives of Tulane University. They suggest he was investigating differences in tissue composition between races, a pseudo-scientific pursuit common in that era, but usually conducted with less rigor and far less ethical concern than even the questionable standards of 19th-century medicine would typically permit. The possible connection between the Coles and Laurent is further suggested by financial records showing that Rosalie made several trips to New Orleans between June and November 1856. Each time, she returned with substantial sums in gold coin, unusual for a woman in that period to transport alone, and difficult to explain as legitimate business transactions given the Coles' financial difficulties. If Elizabeth's account is accurate, it suggests a systematic operation of human harvesting motivated initially by financial desperation, but perhaps sustained by other factors. Rosalie's increasing religious fervor, noted by several contemporaries, may have represented an attempt to reconcile her actions with her conscience. Nathan's withdrawal from society and subsequent alcoholism, mentioned in his physician's notes preceding his death, could similarly reflect psychological deterioration under the weight of their crimes. The fate of Elizabeth Cole remains the most poignant mystery. No record of her arrival in New Orleans exists, nor does any documentation of her death. However, a patient register from the Louisiana State Insane Asylum for 1857 lists a Miss E.C., aged 19, committed by family for dangerous delusions. The entry notes that the patient claims her parents murdered and processed multiple individuals on their property, and expressed fear that she would be next. The register indicates that this patient died of brain fever after 6 months in the institution. Whether this was Elizabeth Cole cannot be confirmed, but the coincidence of timing and circumstances is difficult to ignore. If this was indeed her fate, it represents a final, cruel twist, the silencing of a witness through the very medical establishment that may have benefited from her parents' crimes. The Cole plantation case opens a disturbing window into the darkest possibilities of human behavior when desperation meets opportunity and moral constraint fails. It suggests that beneath the manicured facade of antebellum Southern gentility lurked potential horrors far more immediate and tangible than any supernatural haunting. In 2005, during excavation for utility lines near the former Cole property, workers uncovered a collection of glass containers buried approximately 4 feet below the surface. The containers, estimated to date from the mid-19th century, held preserved organic material in a solution later identified as a mixture of alcohol and arsenic compounds, a preservation technique used by anatomists of the period. The contents were too degraded for definitive identification, but preliminary analysis by the medical examiner's office indicated they were of human origin. After a brief investigation, the containers and their contents were classified as historical medical specimens of unknown provenance, and eventually transferred to a university collection for further study. No connection to the Cole family was officially established. A former groundskeeper for the property where the Cole plantation once stood shared an account with local historian Thomas Wright in 1997 that adds another layer to the mystery. The man, then in his 80s, recalled that while digging irrigation trenches in the 1950s, he and his crew discovered what appeared to be a hidden cellar not documented in any building plans. It was walled with brick and had a heavy iron door, rusted shut, he reported. When we broke it open, we found an empty room about 12 feet square. The floor was concrete, but had these channels cut into it, all leading to a central drain. The walls had iron rings mounted at intervals, about the height a person's wrists would be if they were standing. The whole place had a strange smell, even after all those years, like chemicals and something underneath that I can't describe. We reported it to the property manager, but he told us to brick it up and never mention it again, said it would decrease the property value. So that's what we did. No official record of this discovery exists, and the exact location of this supposed chamber has been lost as the property has been redeveloped multiple times in subsequent decades. However, architectural historians note that hidden rooms and underground spaces were not uncommon in plantation homes, particularly in coastal areas prone to hurricanes and flooding. Their purposes ranged from storage to shelter during storms, though few would have featured the specific elements described in this account. In 1974, anthropologist Dr. Margaret Sinclair conducted interviews with elderly descendants of enslaved people who had worked on Galveston plantations. One interviewee, whose great-grandmother had been enslaved on a property neighboring the Cole plantation, recounted a story passed down through generations. Great-grandma Harriet told her daughter, who told my mother, who told me, that the Cole place was a place of disappearances. People would be working there one day, gone the next. The masters would say they'd been sold off, but no one ever heard from them again. Harriet said that the enslaved people knew better than to ask questions, but they had their ways of warning each other. They had a saying, "When the missus takes to praying and the master takes to drinking, keep your head down and your feet ready." Meant that trouble was brewing, and you might need to run. They said that Mrs. Cole had eyes that saw right through you, like she was measuring your worth by the pound. This oral history, while impossible to verify independently, aligns with the documented changes in Rosalie and Nathan's behavior during the critical period of 1856. It also suggests that those who lived and worked in proximity to the Coles perceived something deeply wrong, even without knowing the specific nature of what might have been occurring on the plantation. A final, tantalizing piece of the puzzle emerged in 1992 when a descendant of Dr. William Harris, the physician who examined Elizabeth Cole in September 1856, discovered a hidden compartment in an antique medical bag inherited from his ancestor. Inside was a folded letter dated October 5th, 1856, addressed to the Galveston sheriff, but apparently never delivered. In the letter, Dr. Harris expressed grave concerns about the Cole family. Having given the matter considerable thought since my examination of Miss Elizabeth Cole, I feel compelled by professional ethics to share certain observations. The young lady, while exhibiting some agitation, struck me as entirely sound of mind. Her concerns regarding activities on the plantation deserve serious investigation. During my visit, I observed unusual security measures throughout the residence, including multiple locked doors and barred windows. Mr. Cole's explanation that these were necessitated by fear of slave uprising seems excessive given the relative calm in the region. More concerning was my glimpse of what appeared to be surgical implements in Mr. Cole's study, tools that would have no place in a plantation home. When I inquired about these items, Mrs. Cole interposed herself between myself and her husband, explaining that he had developed an interest in amateur dissection of small animals for scientific inquiry. The explanation was delivered with practiced ease, yet her eyes betrayed apprehension. Most disturbing was what I observed as I departed the property. Near the cotton barn, I witnessed two workers carrying what appeared to be a human body wrapped in canvas. When they saw my carriage, they quickly retreated into the structure. Mr. Cole, who had accompanied me to my conveyance, explained that it was merely a deer carcass from a recent hunt. I relate these observations with great reluctance, being aware of Mr. Cole's standing in the community and the serious nature of any implications. However, I cannot in good conscience remain silent if there exists even the possibility that crimes are being committed on the Cole plantation. Why this letter was never delivered remains unknown. Dr. Harris continued to practice in Galveston until 1860, when he relocated to Houston. His medical notes make no further mention of the Cole family. The letter itself, following its discovery, was donated to the Galveston Historical Society, where it remains in their archived collections, a silent witness to concerns raised but never addressed. The Cole plantation mystery stands as a dark reminder of how history can conceal as much as it reveals. The disappearance of 14 human beings from official records represents 14 lives erased, not just physically, but from memory and acknowledgement. Elizabeth Cole's fate, whether she died in an asylum or met some other end, represents the silencing of truth by those with the power to define reality. In modern Galveston, the story is occasionally recounted as a macabre local legend, stripped of its historical context and reduced to a simple ghost story. Few connect it to the broader patterns of exploitation and dehumanization that characterize the antebellum South, or recognize it as an extreme manifestation of how human lives could be reduced to commodities. Yet beneath the layers of urban development, literally and figuratively, lies evidence of what may have been one of the darkest chapters in Galveston's history. The carefully excised plantation ledger pages, the quicklime purchases, the hidden surgical implements, the mysterious containers with preserved human remains, all point to a horror that was entirely human in origin and motivation. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the coal plantation mystery is its plausibility. While definitive proof of the Coles crimes remains elusive, the fragmented evidence forms a coherent picture of what could have occurred when financial desperation, moral corruption, and absolute power over human lives converged in the isolated setting of a coastal plantation. The space beneath the coal house, now covered by asphalt and concrete, holds secrets that may never be fully uncovered. The voices of those who disappeared have been silenced by time and deliberate erasure. What remains is the outline of a darkness that reminds us of the capacity for evil that exists within ordinary human beings when circumstance and character align in particular ways. In the end, the most disturbing aspect of the coal plantation mystery is not what we know, but what we can reasonably infer, and the recognition that similar horrors may have occurred elsewhere, leaving even fewer traces for history to discover. It stands as a testament to the importance of questioning official narratives, preserving even fragmentary evidence, and acknowledging that the darkest chapters of our collective past may be those that were most successfully hidden from view. Today, as traffic passes over the site where the coal plantation once stood, few drivers realize they are traversing ground that may hold the dissolved remains of 14 human beings, sacrificed to financial expediency and perverse medical curiosity. The buildings are gone, the principals long dead, the evidence scattered or destroyed. But the essence of what happened there lingers, in archived documents, in oral histories, and in the disturbing questions the case continues to raise about how completely the truth of the past can be buried. As we conclude this examination of what may be the most disturbing mystery in Galveston's history, we are left with more questions than answers. What exactly happened to Elizabeth Cole after her final journal entry? Was she committed to an asylum, or did she meet a fate similar to the 14 people who disappeared from the plantation records? What became of the materials that Rosalie allegedly transported to New Orleans, and who ultimately benefited from this gruesome trade? These questions may never be fully answered. The systematic destruction of evidence, from the missing plantation ledger pages to the convenient fire that destroyed Elizabeth's journal, suggests a deliberate effort to erase this history. That such efforts were largely successful speaks to the power structures that enabled and then concealed what occurred at the coal plantation in 1856. For the 14 individuals who disappeared that summer, historical records offer not even the dignity of names. They exist now only as a numerical discrepancy, their identities, lives, and sufferings unacknowledged in official accounts. Whatever horror they experienced in their final moments remains known only to them and to their tormentors. The coal plantation mystery serves as a reminder that history is not merely what is documented, but also what is deliberately omitted from documentation. It challenges us to look beyond official narratives and to recognize the voices that have been silenced. Most of all, it reminds us that true horror resides not in supernatural manifestations, but in the darkest capacities of human nature when unleashed by greed, desperation, and moral corruption. As night falls over modern Galveston, the ghosts that haunt this story are not spectral apparitions, but the uncomfortable truths about our collective past that we have yet to fully confront. The most disturbing mysteries are those that reveal not what we have to fear from beyond the grave, but what we have to fear from our fellow human beings, and perhaps from ourselves. The sound that still echoes across the century and a half since those summer nights in 1856 is not the rattling of chains or the moaning of spirits. It is the silence, the vast, complicit silence that allowed 14 people to vanish without question, that permitted Elizabeth Cole's witness to be dismissed as delusion, that facilitated the careful erasure of evidence pointing to systematic atrocity. It is a silence that continues to this day, broken only occasionally by the fragments of truth that emerge from forgotten archives, chance discoveries, and the persistent efforts of those who believe that even the darkest chapters of history deserve to be acknowledged. For in that acknowledgement lies our only defense against the repetition of such horrors, the recognition that they were possible once, and therefore could be possible again if we allow ourselves to look away from uncomfortable truths or to silence those who dare to speak them. The Cole plantation mystery reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not those invented around campfires, but those buried in our historical record, waiting to be unearthed. And perhaps the most disturbing realization of all is not what happened on that Galveston plantation in 1856, but how completely it was hidden from view, and how many other such horrors might lie similarly concealed beneath the polite fictions of our shared history. In that sense, the mystery is not just about what Nathan and Rosalie Cole may have done. It is about what we, collectively, have failed to see, failed to question, and failed to acknowledge. And that is a horror that continues to haunt us long after the last physical traces of the Cole plantation have vanished beneath the inexorable advance of time and development. The next time you find yourself in Galveston, perhaps driving over the area where the Cole plantation once stood, take a moment to remember those 14 unnamed individuals whose disappearance from the record sparked this dark investigation. In that remembrance lies perhaps the only justice they will ever receive, the acknowledgement that they existed, that they mattered, and that what happened to them should never have been buried beneath layers of silence and deliberate forgetting. For in the end, the most disturbing slave mystery in Galveston history is not just about what happened in 1856. It is about how effectively that horror was concealed, and what that concealment tells us about our capacity to look away from uncomfortable truths, both in the past and in the present day.